I would print the majority of press releases that would come out of the Capitol. What I have learned since I've been at the Capitol is that those press releases do not always equal what's actually going on. So I said in that meeting, I didn't see that happen. Case in point today, we read the editorial in the Oklahoman today about Senator Smalley out of Lincoln County on being single-handedly responsible for diverting $50 million out of the county roads fund because of the $75 million for the railroad. There are some bits and pieces in there that are factual. When they sold the railroad between Tulsa and Oklahoma City, it was for $75 million. It was going to be absorbed just into ODOT, and yet our laws, the Constitution says that any sale of that property of railroad must be used with railroads. And we have a number of railroads that are still on operation in Oklahoma, so Senator Smalley asked for an Attorney General's opinion, which froze that $75 million. And so it may end up with ODOT, it may not end up with ODOT, we'll see how it goes. That being related to the County Roads and Bridges Fund, that discussion never happened. It was never there in any appropriation meetings or anything else, and I'm going to go over some of those things tonight. I want to point out several things to you, that handouts that I think that I was surprised by. These handouts I have tonight are actual handouts from the Senate. This sheet that you got on a large sheet is where I'm going to start tonight. Just kind of show you a few things. I know it's small print, and I've got the whole thing up here as they gave me on a chart, and I did these for this meeting here tonight. These are apportionments that were put out by the finance of the Senate and, of course, by the legislature. And those for this last budget year are not finished yet because our budget year is not finished yet. When we talk about apportionments, we're talking about off-the-top money. And so whenever we get around to being able to appropriate a budget, we are appropriating only between 43 and 44 cents out of every dollar from previous legislators that have been up there, and we're term limited out, and very few of them up there. There were things that were set in place, many of those by percentages, and those just keep growing and growing and growing. Whenever that we pass no new taxes, in State Question 640, those of you that are in business or have been around businesses, you realize that we have new fees every time that we turn around, and those have doubled, some have tripled. And tonight we'll talk about revolving funds in just a little bit, and when we get over to the budget. This is a total list of all of the apportionments that come off the top before we are able to appropriate any money. So there's been a lot of talk about like the motor vehicle tax, and if you looked on your sheet of paper, you would run down to a motor vehicle tax on that. And see, it ought to be front side of that, down right next to the bottom, one of those big charts that's left over there, and down at the bottom. You would notice that sale of motor vehicles, there are percentages of that is taken out, the total apportionment being about $784 million. And whenever we come across, you see from the top where all that money then is tracked, some into the general fund, some into state transportation, some is returned back to the counties and highways, the $52 million. There are some that's returned back to fund county government, almost $6 million, and then goes back into your cities and your towns. You can follow all the way across school districts, and then over the right side it says other, and those are all the other numbers that are broken down and shows you where all of that money is being spent. Now, one of the things that happened within the Senate this year is that we decided early on as a Republican caucus and really as the Appropriations Committee, and all senators are on the general appropriations, and Republican and Democrat. And I just want to pause there for a moment. It's easy not to be the ruling party because all you got to do is just sit back and gripe that it's not working. And but however, I want you to know they were in on the same General Appropriations Committee meetings as I sat in on and the rest of them. We decided as a Senate that we need to cap these apportionments because they grow. Like the motor vehicle tax set at 18% keeps growing more and more and more all of the time. And we're hearing some things concerning how that cap that we've done this year has damaged, especially our roads and bridges. And then, of course, in the wake of all the flooding that's going on, we've capped that money and we don't have the money in the roads and bridges. You have a budget before you that we'll look at in just a little bit. And you've also got a list before you of all the money that was taken from all the different revolving funds. When we look at the county commissioners and talking to them, they have a 5-year road and bridges plan. Gene Wallace out on Okmulgee, who is leading that group, and I've known Gene for years, $120 million a year keeps them on their 5-year road and bridges plan. This year, their apportionment was $120 million capped there, and they received the 2015, same one they would have done if we had not capped that apportionment. Now, because of the tax and the cap on that apportionment, there was $21 million that was above the $120 million that was above there that we can put back into the general fund that we're going to be able to now appropriate for other areas. So we funded them at $120 million exactly as they asked to be funded. Number two, we took $50 million out of that account, out of that revolving fund account, go back into the general fund, and you probably heard that much in the news. What you did not hear in the news is what left them in that revolving fund account was $216 million. That's before we put the $120 million into it this year. And so in the CIRB fund, even after the $50 million was taken out to help balance the budget, there is $216 million in there. Now, we're working with county commissioners. I was in Okmulgee County a week ago Monday in a commissioner meeting talking to them about our roads and what we can do. McIntosh County, talking to them about what our roads in McIntosh County, what we can do. Tusky County, talking to Bill Elliott, our emergency management director, even this morning about what we can do. We're all applying for federal aid, FEMA money that's coming in, and they're a major part of getting our roads and bridges back. The estimate that has already been published, if the federal government did not put a dime into restoring our roads and bridges, maybe you read the article, it's $200 million. That's how much damage the last flooding has done. Keep in mind that in the County Commissioner Fund, the CIRB fund, there is $216 million still sitting in there for this next budget before they get their $120 million appropriation. Now, when I look at revolving funds, you've got a sheet of paper that we handed out a few moments ago that just simply listed all of the revolving funds. It's like this one right here. Whenever we talk about the funds that were taken to balance the budget, I want us to understand concerning these funds, if you're a budget or a fund, if you have a business or if you have a household, I would dare say a number of you here tonight have multiple checking accounts in our businesses. I have a checking account for the news leader. I have a checking account for my real estate. I have a checking account for my office supply. I have a checking account for our flower shop that we have. We operate about 4 different checking accounts. My wife and I own all of those businesses. And so we just ask a general question, whose money is that in those checking accounts? That'd be ours. When I look at all these revolving funds, these agencies believe this money belongs to them. This is your checking accounts. You are the owner of all of this money. And so I ask you, is there a time in your life that you said, honey, I think we need to transfer some funds out of this account into this account so we can make our budget meet this month? We have done that. And so we talk about removing some of these monies out of these accounts. These accounts are still in operation. They're still able to do what they need to do as far as the government is concerned, but we took excess money out of those accounts. I don't think for a moment that they are hurting. We'll make 2 points. Number one, we heard how much DHS needed more money. We finished our appropriations for DHS this year, and before I'm even home from session, there's a semi-trailer and a bobtail parked at the DHS office in Okmulgee, unloading brand new office furniture into that office. That's your money that's going in there. I don't know how many more they did like that. The whole idea, if you leave money in there, we're going to spend it somewhere and going on. Now, when we go back to this chart over here that we are only appropriating 44 cents out of every dollar, we're ending up with accounts growing like this. Now, those are on fees. Fees ought to be charged for a reasonable service that would fund the government enough to handle whatever services they're having. Some of you may remember last year whenever they helped balance the budget by taking money from some of the revolving funds and said that's one-time money. Yeah. And we cannot do that again. We've done that again this year in some of those same funds, which means is that what we took last year to help balance the budget, those accounts grew back within 1 year. So some of the legislation that we looked at this year was doing away with some of the fees that some of these agencies are charging. And so we have, yes, a $611 million budget deficit. We're anticipating, if oil doesn't turn around and oil is a catalyst for us, we're going to anticipate probably a $500 million deficit coming into this next year as well. That's kind of what we're looking at. Now, so those are the accounts that we're taking. I put out an overview of our budget this year. This is the first year in the history, at least the recent history, that anybody can remember whenever we put out a full budget of what the state of Oklahoma has. In the small sheet that you have here on the general appropriations is broken down by the various committees. And so when we look at the State Department of Education on this one, they will remain flat. There was no money that was increased, no money that was taken away. Now, in a budget year where there are a number of those that were cut, we felt good about public education being exactly where that it was. The Department of Transportation, at the bottom of that one, you can see that they were cut 6.25%. But keep in mind, they are also still being appropriated $184 million. Now, in this budget, as I mentioned a while ago, one of the new things that we have done this year, and we're glad to have it finally in there, is that we hear a lot of times about the state of Oklahoma having $7.1 billion budget that we're operating off of. And yet, and I believe it's on page 17 of this, if you'll look at transportation, this budget is not a $7 billion budget. This is a $24 billion budget. That's what we're working on in the state of Oklahoma. And so when you go over to transportation on page 17, you're going to see the $184 million that was appropriated by the state. And then if you look at all of the other money, the dedicated funds that are coming in from all these on the side over here that comes back into transportation, interagency funds that are spent, other funds. Now, other funds can be federal funds, they can be grants, they can be fees, can be a number of things, and other funds. They're receiving $575 million, and when you get to the end of that, ODOT has $1,654,501,483 in their budget. That's how much money they're working on roads inside the state of Oklahoma. That's a lot of money. And so when we look at what we can do on the state's end, that they can still receive the same money they're receiving, they can get by. They can get by. If you look back on this other budget, what they were actually cut in transportation from the year before was about, from 197 down to 184, it's about $13 million. Now, if you got a $1.6 billion budget, losing $13 million is not going to put you in the poorhouse. Losing $13 million out of there is still not going to stop them from fixing the county roads and county bridges. We did not balance the budget on the backs of our county roads. We've heard that. Tonight you've got the evidence right in front of you. And by the way, the last sheet on this is the one that's signed by Mary Fallon, the governor, whenever she signed this budget into law. This is the official copy of the budget that was signed into law, what you have in your hands here tonight. I think as constituents, we need to know how much money our government's spending. Right. Now, we got some challenges within our budget. When I look at transportation, I also look at, they are saying, we can get them $800 million a year on the 8-year road and bridges plan. They can put our road and bridges where they need to be. Previous legislators have agreed we will keep upping their contribution by $59 million a year until they reach $800 million. When the Democrats were in charge, it was $200 million a year. That's it. That's all they ever had. And so whenever we say funding for transportation has gone down under Republican leadership, it's actually gone up by 34%. Those are the facts. And we put $59 million more into that until they reach $800 million. That money was not touched inside this budget. It was still there. Some of the challenges that we're looking at as a state. Higher education did take a 2.44% cut. Now, 3.5 is what we initially looked at, but they had a bond that was about $8.6 million that we paid off within the budget, so they actually took a 2.44% cut. We want our students to be able to go to school, there's no doubt about that. Here's some things that I struggled with whenever I looked at their budget. And what we did in our budget appropriation meetings is our top 12 agencies, we called the head of those agencies in. They supplied us with all of their documentation, and for an hour to an hour and a half, we grilled them on their expenditures. We looked into their savings accounts. We found a couple of things that not all of them were forthcoming in some of their accounts. For instance, one of the things that I'm doing right now, and when I say not forthcoming, they didn't intentionally deceive us, they just didn't intentionally give us all the information. During the interim, I have 19 agencies that I'm over in my subcommittee. I'm meeting with our fiscal analysts once a week. And my meeting was supposed to be tomorrow. I work at the Capitol still one day a week. I go over last week on 3 or 4 different areas. One of those is the area of our state auditor. Another was our election board. Look at all of their budgets from what actual money is deposited into the account. So I'm looking over the election board physical sheet, and they received $145,000 interest payment last year into their account. Now, to make $145,000 interest, there must be some money somewhere that was not revealed on the sheet that I had. And so I just go down and ask Paul, what's going on? Well, the federal government has given $8 million to the state of Oklahoma for Help American Vote Act, HAVA. That money is sitting in an account that can be used to upgrade some of our systems within our counties. I'm not sure all our county election boards know about that. It can be used to help people get out and vote. It cannot pay salaries. It cannot maintain offices. But it's there. But we as a state made $145,000 worth of interest off of that. My question is, can we spend that interest? Absolutely. And so when we look at cutting a budget for the election board, and we cut their budget, folks are making $145,000 inside their budget. Whenever we deal with the auditor, and I have a notebook like this just for each one of these agencies, and you're welcome to look at this notebook. But in our auditor over the last 5 years, and the documentation will follow here, that his expenditures has actually increased 4% in the last 5 years, and that he has a total cut of only 2%, and he's spending $11 million a year in the auditor's office. So when we look at it, did we cut his budget this year? Absolutely, cut his budget. But he's still operating the way that he's always operated. Matter of fact, even spending more money, because you see he's collecting fees for like county audit services. The state auditor charged $1,071,009 in 09, $845,000 for county auditing in 15. But now if we look on the second line down here, we come down to county auditing fees for 15, and our state auditor charged our county $2,872,157 for county auditing fees. That's just one. There's about 12 of those, and each one of those of different fees that add up to over $6 million a year charged in fees for our auditor. Now, if he's making that kind of money out of the fees, why would we want to turn around and appropriate a full appropriation that would go back in there when we could use the money somewhere else? And that's what we're looking at. So when they stand up and they cry and they said, you cut our budget, that's true. But as Paul Harvey would say, let's hear the rest of the story. And let's get down and look at it. I've got questions I don't have answered here yet, because in this accounting, the Oklahoma Pension Commission Revolving Fund, he is receiving there about $110,000 that is passed through. We're looking at $126,209. And then there's a note, these funds are collected from various pensions, and then around $110,000 is passed through to pay NEPC, an outside firm, for pension consulting services, and the rest for administrative costs required by the Pension Commission. So on a $126,000 firm, or a payment to the auditor, we paid $110,000 for an outside firm to audit that one pension fund. Folks, there's a whole notebook here, all the spreadsheets. And that's why I say just simply breaking it down and taking a look at it and saying, what do we have going on? what we have going on is, and I want to say tonight, we do not really have a money problem in the state of Oklahoma. We've got a spending problem.
That's right. Amen.
It is a spending problem that we inherited. Now, keep in mind on term limits that we inherited many of those decisions that were made long ago, and we need to turn the vote. Senator Patrick Anderson, a Republican senator out of Enid, and Patrick's an unusual individual. He is an individual all the way around. He is one unique person I just love to visit with, but he coined some phrases that'll make you stop and think. And he coined one in Enid this last week at a chamber meeting, talking about what's going on at the Capitol. And Patrick Anderson said, quote, he said, "It is still a house of prostitution. The only thing changed are the pimps." I don't know that I would have said that, but somewhat it's true. There's all kinds of money. And what we've got to do, we've got to get a handle on it. This year, in the Republican leadership within the Senate that says, we as a leadership are holding firm to start capping this money. Find out what they need. No one took a cut this year in their budget. No one's budget was cut. We just capped it at what it would have been in 2015. Now, that's going to pay big dividends down the line in the next 3 to 4 years as that money starts rolling in. Just think, just in one of those funds is $21 million this year that went right back into the general fund that we're able to do some things with. We are challenged. Our Medicaid in Oklahoma and Department of Human Services, a couple of areas, if you look on the budget over here,